Welcome everyone to season one, episode one of our weekly Beyond the Womanist Classroom podcast. I am your host, Dr. Mitzi Smith. I am a womanist biblical scholar, professor, and author. In this podcast, we will discuss all things womanism, biblical interpretation, and justice. Today, we will discuss the basic tenets of womanist biblical interpretation and justice. My co-host today and conversation partner is Miss Rebecca Christian. Has earned a master's in education and has been a public school teacher, educator for over a decade. She is new to the Black church experience and relatively new to womanism. She assisted with the Womanist Zoom dialogues. Some of you may remember that I started shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Miss Christian will bring her unique experiences and questions to this conversation. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you here. It's great to have you here and to start this conversation with you. So, I do want to start with Alice Walker's definition of womanist that comes from her book In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. Because some of our audience will not be familiar with the term womanist, and so I'd like to share. And many of us need to revisit it. Womanist is a four-part definition from womanish, as in the opposite of girlish, frivolous, irresponsible, not serious. A womanist is a Black feminist or feminist of color. From the Black folk expression of mothers to female children, you acting womanish, like a woman, usually referring to outrageous, audacious, courageous, and willful behavior, wanting to know more and in greater depth than is good for one, interested in grown up doings, acting grown up, being grown up, interchangeable with another Black folk expression. You trying to be grown, responsible, in charge, and serious. Also, part two, a woman who loves other women sexually or non sexually, appreciates and refers to women's culture, women's emotional flexibility, and women's strength. Sometimes it loves individual men sexually and or non-sexually, committed to survival and wholeness of entire people, male and female. Not a separatist except periodically for health. Traditionally universalist, or I'd like to use the word that some of my South African scholar sisters used the other night, a globalist, as in, quote, Mama, why are we brown, pink, and yellow, and our cousins are white, beige, and black? Answer, well, the colored race is just like a flower garden with every color flower represented, unquote. A womanist is traditionally capable, as in, quote, Mama, I'm walking to Canada and I'm taking you and a bunch of other slaves with me, unquote. Reply, it wouldn't be the first time. Number four, three, loves music, loves dance, loves the moon, loves the spirit with a capital S, loves love and food and roundness, loves struggle, loves the folk, loves herself regardless. Number four, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. What comes to mind, Rebecca, as you hear that definition?
To me, the part that most resonates is the woman who is outspoken, the woman who has something to say and wants to be heard. To me, I think that there are countless women in the history of women of color, African American women, who have done, spoken with their minds, but also made a difference in the lives of people, and have changed conditions for us today. So to me, when I think of that definition, I think of it in that context. But I realize the definition is broad enough to fit many people, who can also contribute in various ways. So I think that's one of the benefits of the term you use, globalist, right?
Mhm.
Because it's not just about you, but thinking about the entire global community as well.
Yes, yes, so true, Rebecca. Because an outrageous, audacious, courageous, willful person will refuse to be silenced, to be muted, to be rendered invisible, right? And is always interested in freedom or liberation, and not just one's own liberation and freedom, but in the liberation and freedom of an entire people, right? Of our communities and also globally. And it also doesn't mean that we don't stop to take care of ourselves. Traditionally, also a separatist for a short while for self care, right? Bell
Mhm.
Hooks says self care for Black women is a political act, right? So it is very political, right? It is politics. Look, politics is in the air we breathe. The question is, what type of politics will we practice? Yes. At one point, you asked me, do you remember the question you asked me about Alice Walker?
Well, I want to
Sometime.
know, did you know whether or not she practiced a religion, or what did she ascribe to in terms of her belief system?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, and I can't speak for her. I do know that at one time she was married to a Jewish man and may have converted to Judaism at that time. But I would say that she's probably would see herself as spiritual, right? Certainly, she has a sense, as we see in the definition, of a higher power. She capitalizes the word spirit, a power beyond ourselves that Black women have and can tap into, right? In our struggles for freedom, our struggles to survive and to thrive. Which brings me to, because we are talking about womanism and biblical interpretation, the fact that Black women have traditionally believed in a higher power, whether it was on the continent of Africa before many African Americans, or our ancestors, that is, were forcefully brought to this country and enslaved. We've always had a sense of a higher power, of a creator God by different names, right? If we look at and Alan Callahan's book, the Talking Book, brings this out, is that when we were brought to this country, to this so-called New World, we were already worshipers of a creator God. We were already practitioners of African traditional religions. We were papists or Catholics, perhaps with a small c. In other words, we were Christians, we practiced Islam, we were Muslims, and we probably practiced a synthesis of these, a synthesis, right? An amalgamation of these various expressions of religion, right? But we also have spirituality, right? So there is something like an organized religion, institutional religion, but there's also something that we would call spirituality, something within us that can be impacted by organized religion, but goes beyond. organized religion. That's something that gets us through, right? From day to day, each day. That allows us to keep getting up, keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when we don't feel like it. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would agree that if you look at the historical continuum, like you mentioned before, people of African descent came from a people who were spiritually based. Now, that might have been, I'll just say, disrupted during the process of being brought here to this America, but by no means, as you mentioned many times, that Christianity was the only thing given to us, or the Bible
Mhm.
was given to us as an artifact. That's it. But there are certain contexts which you've mentioned before. That all this stuff doesn't just come out of thin air, and it's not as if were not spiritually grounded, you know, ancestrally in some way before being impacted by religion. So I think that that's really important for people to that you've mentioned, is for people to know as well, because I think sometimes
Yes.
when you even look at things like the Bible, maybe all they look at is that one specific text and not look at
Mhm.
what does it mean today, or who was telling that story and what was their point of view. And those are things that should not get lost, especially because, again, that ties in with what you've mentioned before about justice, right? And who is telling it, what is their interest in saying it and presenting the information in this way. And having that critical eye is, I think, really important.
Yes, yes. So the Bible has been an artifact in different forms, whether it's the Hebrew scriptures, the Bible as containing both canons, the New or the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament, however the First Testament, the Second Testament, however you want to articulate that, has been a part, an artifact, an item of cultural and historical interest to the Black community before enslavement. Right? We have the witness of the Ethiopian Bible, right? And that history, that text, that only illustrated Bible that go illustration of the Bible that goes back to, I believe, like the 5th century, that is in a monastery in Ethiopia. So it always has been a part of our culture and our history before enslavement. And even the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in the Acts of the Apostles uh, is sort of points to, right, points to that very history, right, going back long before enslavement, long before the modern era, right. So when we look at, also when we think about womanism as Black feminism, we are thinking about intersectionality, right. Unlike white feminism, we are concerned with how race and racism, how gender and sexism, how class and classism, and sexuality impact Black women's lives, the lives of others in the Black community, men and children, and beyond the Black community. So our analysis is intersectional, so that when we read the Bible, we are interested in reading it through the framework of Black women's and in conversation with Black women's intersectional realities and the intersectional oppressions that impact our lives.
And I think just on the thought you just mentioned about, I don't know if people really think about the Bible in the context that some of the things in there may be examples of oppression. I don't know that people will look at it, and I don't know that that is a way that people perceive it. And I think sometimes maybe it's kind of glossed over for whatever reasons. That maybe that's the lack of being comfortable about mentioning it, or feeling that maybe in some way, that it's the unspoken um, situation in the room where people don't feel comfortable about discussing, because you may offend, right? People don't want to offend. But certainly if you're talking about freedom and talking about really getting people to make some shifts in society that will help the lives of everyone,
Mhm.
then we do have to have some of those conversations about, well, because what in my view happens is that when that conversation isn't had, some of those behaviors, some of those things that may not be beneficial to people are carried out. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
not in the same overt ways, but in ways that maybe women don't get the same opportunities, or are not perceived as being as spiritual as someone else because of gender. And I think that those are things that people have to examine, especially today.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one thing that an intersectional lens and a lens that prioritizes Black women's experiences or artifacts, of which the Bible is one, or artifacts, are the injustices that we face, right? When reading the Bible, I do not read, and I'm speaking as one womanist biblical scholar, a womanist biblical scholar. I don't speak for all womanist biblical scholars, but we cannot, in my opinion, read the Bible the way we've been taught through a slave religion to apply what we find in the Bible to our lives uncritically. Because as you say, Rebecca, there is a lot of violence in the Bible that if it is not critiqued, violence and oppression, if it is not critiqued, we simply normalize it and repeat it in our churches, in our communities, and in our own lives. Yes, we must read the Bible critically. And that goes to whose history, whose story do we start with? And a lot of times we are convinced as religious persons, as Christians, as Black women, that we should start with the Bible. But even that insistence is an insistence that we start with the Bible as interpreted and translated by the dominant class. We have to be willing to start elsewhere at a different point. So I want to read something else to you out of Alice Walker's book. In this last, her book, In Our Mother's Gardens, in these last few minutes that we have. She has a chapter going to justice, uh, the importance of justice. She has a chapter in this same book, and I had it marked and I lost it, but I'm going to find it here again toward the end of this book. She has a chapter about justice. And it begins with a prayer. It begins with a prayer that Zora Neale Hurston found in 1921. Here we go, in part 4. And the chapter is entitled, Only Justice Can Stop a Curse. And this is the prayer that Zora Neale Hurston found. I'm just going to read a part of it. To the man of God, to the man God, I'm sorry, to the man God, the male God. Oh, great one, I have been sorely tried by my enemies and have been blasphemed and lied against. My good thoughts and my honest actions have been turned to bad actions and dishonest ideas. My home has been disrespected. My children have been cursed and ill treated. My dear ones have been backbitten and their virtue questioned. Oh man, God, I beg that I ask for my enemy shall come to pass. Semicolon. And this is part of what she asked. That the south wind shall scorch their bodies and make them wither, and shall not be tempered them. That the north wind shall freeze their blood and numb their muscles, and that it shall not be tempered to them. that the west wind shall blow away their lives' breath, and will not leave their hair grow, and that their fingernails shall fall off, and their bones shall crumble, that the east wind shall shake their minds grow dark, their sight shall fail, and their seed dry up, so that they shall not multiply. And towards the end, she writes, "Oh man, God, I ask you for all these things because they have dragged me in the dust and destroyed my good name, broken my heart, and caused me to curse the day that I was born. So be it." And Jordan Hurston, Alice Walker writes, "I have often marveled at it, that is, this prayer, this curse, at the precision of its anger, the absoluteness of its bitterness, its utter hatred of the enemies it condemns. It is a curse prayer by a person who would readily, almost happily, commit suicide if it meant her enemies would also die, horribly die. I am sure it was a woman who first prayed that curse. And I see her, black, yellow, brown, or red, aboriginal, as the ancients are called in South Africa and Australia and other lands invaded, expropriated, and occupied by whites. And I think with astonishment that the curse prayer of this colored woman, starved, enslaved, humiliated, and carelessly trampled to death over centuries, is coming to pass. Indeed, like ancient peoples of color the world over, who have tried to tell the white man of the destruction that would inevitably follow from the uranium mining plunder of their sacred lands, this woman, along with millions and billions of obliterated sisters, brothers, and children, seems to have put such enormous energy into her hope for revenge that her curse seems close to bringing it about. And it is this hope for revenge, finally, I think, that is at the heart of many people of color's resistance to the present anti nuclear movement. And Walker goes on to say that we must do something. We must do something as individuals. We must do something collectively. And so she says at the end of this essay, "So let me tell you, I intend to protect my house, my home, praying, not a curse, only the hope that my courage will not fail my love. But if by some miracle and all our struggle the earth is spared, only justice to every living thing, and everything is alive, will save humankind. And we are not yet saved. We are not saved yet. Only justice can stop a curse." Only justice can stop a curse. I had a student once, as we close, I had a student once, Rebecca, when I taught in the Detroit metro area, a Black woman. And she was in one of my Bible classes. I think it was a Hebrew Bible or Old Testament class. And she wasn't doing well. And I could tell that she was distracted, that she was under some kind of pressure. So I met with her in my office and she shared with me that her son had been killed. And I'm talking years earlier, something like 7 years earlier. Her son had been killed. And her son had been murdered by his cousin, her sister's son. And she said that she could not rest until she got justice, that she had gone to pastors who counseled her to just forget it, to let it go, to let God take care of it. But she said, I can't. She said things are bad between my sister and I. You know, the son who murdered her son's mother. Things are bad. Things are strange. She said, I cannot rest until my nephew is brought to justice. And this is 7 years, remember, after the murder. But I said to her, I said, being in seminary is a lot of pressure. This is graduate school. That's a lot of pressure. And you are just adding pressure to the stress you are already under because of the justice you have not gotten. And so I told her that it would be better for her to take a break from seminary, and if she wanted to, come back later. So she took my advice. And perhaps about 6 months or more later, she left a phone message on my phone at work in the office. And she sounded like a different person. She
Mm.
said, Dr. Smith, they found my nephew and he is standing trial and I am getting justice. She no longer needed seminary either. She sounded like a different person. Justice is contextual. And what we think we don't need is not the same thing that another person needs, right? She needed justice to go on with her life.
Mhm.
And we will continue to talk about justice. What is justice? Justice, I would say, at the very least, is contextual, right? Yes, we can talk about justice is the absence of violence. What kind of violence, right? Justice is the absence of oppression. Justice is the presence of absolute freedom, not freedom to hurt other people, but freedom to live our lives unhindered. But justice is still contextual, right? So we will continue in this podcast to talk about the intersection of womanism, biblical interpretation, and justice. Do you have any final words, Rebecca, Miss
It's
Christian?
been great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being my conversation partner today in episode 1, season 1. What is it that you, as our audience, can do? I'd like to encourage you that if you are not already a member of our private Facebook group called Beyond the Womanist Classroom, you are welcome to join as long as you are serious about furthering the conversation with us. In that space, we will continue the conversations that we have or begin in these podcasts. We'd also like for you to follow us on Twitter at T, Beyond capital T C. I'm sorry, excuse me, Beyond at Beyond capital T W C. At Beyond, the full word spelled out, capital T, capital W, capital C, Beyond the Womanist Classroom. And if you listened to anything or heard anything that resonated with you, please tweet and tweet hashtag BT Womanist C. BT Womanist C hashtag. And we'll see you next time. Please share the broadcast. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Good night.